Natural Habitat Adventures is pleased to be bringing you this webinar today, Explore the Wild Side of Culture-Rich Sri Lanka, presented by Toby Sinclair. A London-born Scot, Toby first drove out to India in 1974, and by late 1975 he joined Tiger Top's Jungle Lodge in Nepal's Royal Chitwan National Park. He later moved to Delhi and helped establish both Mountain Travel India and an office for Tiger Tops. Toby has trekked extensively in the western Himalayas, and he helped establish the Kipling Camp in Kanha National Park and Bandhavgarh Jungle Camp. He's been on the advisory committee of the Bombay Natural History Society and is today on the Government of India's Steering Committee on Protected Area Management. He is also the co-founder and vice president of Ecotourism Society of India. He was the recipient of the 2007 Zeiss Award for Conservation, and he is a trustee of the Global Tiger Patrol. For the last 20 years, his main work has been handling the field production of BBC Natural History Unit filming in the wilderness areas and parks of India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan. These films get broadcast on Discovery, Animal Planet, and National Geographic in addition to the BBC. And in addition to his own photography, which we will be enjoying today, he has been consultant to and handled logistics on numerous photographic projects and has edited and contributed to a series of books on different parts of South Asia. And we are delighted to have you here with us today, Toby. Thank you so much. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. There were a few things that were said just now that I'd forgotten about, so I need to go back and look at the small print. Sri Lanka. I first visited Sri Lanka in 1980. I went down to join a friend who was making a film for a series called Survival, now a defunct series, and he was filming leopards and filming elephants for two separate one-hour programs. And since then, I've gone back many times and worked on other films for BBC in Sri Lanka. And there I am, looking out over a misty morning, actually close to Delhi, a few days ago when we went for the big bird count together with some colleagues and friends from the World Wildlife Fund. There's an annual day around the world when everyone goes out to see how many species they can get. Happy to say we did 103 species in 4 hours just outside Delhi, which is a vast city of 20 million people. So it was quite impressive to find this wetland and go back to explore. In the last few years, last 5 or 6 years, I spent a lot of time in Sri Lanka and worked on some specific films, including one feature-length natural history film for Disney called Monkey Kingdom, which I'll come back to in a while. This was released a year ago. A 3-part series for National Geographic Wild called Wild Sri Lanka, and earlier a film on elephants in a specific national park in the southeast corner of the country. Putting those experiences and my experiences of working with natural habitat over the last 10 or so years elsewhere in the subcontinent, in India, Nepal, and Bhutan, we have put together a 12-day program which we try and encompass the best of Sri Lanka. Inevitably, a first tour is always going to be rather like a swallow flying over a pond of water, coming down to drink every so often, just touching the surface and getting the taste of the landscape. But we will arrive on the west coast, or you will arrive on the west coast of Sri Lanka, where you will meet my colleagues and I. And we spend the first night in a small coastal town called Negombo before heading to the northeast up towards an area which is known as the Cultural Triangle of Sri Lanka, full of wonderful archaeological sites. But within that landscape are some great wildlife experiences. And I'll come to some of those in a moment. From there, we then move into the hill country of Sri Lanka, famous for its tea. Sri Lanka remains one of the largest producers of tea in the world and largest exporters. And the same hills have a wide range of wildlife, pockets of montane forest in some areas, and then ultimately we'll travel to the southeast corner to the great national park of Yala. And from Yala, we'll travel along the coast, spend a couple of days near Galle, manage to take boats out into the ocean for whale watching, and ultimately return to Colombo. So our first stop, and one of the joys of traveling in Sri Lanka, is that the island is relatively compact. In a sense, it is India-light, but without a lot of the baggage that India is sort of known for. There are some excellent hotels. This is the Lagoon Hotel, the Jetwing Lagoon Hotel, which is our first stop, where as a group we come together from wherever in the world that you've started your journey. Good compact rooms looking out over the lagoon and a wonderful Olympic-sized swimming pool. But we will soon want to head north, or to more exactly northeast, into an area famous for its wild elephant population. Sri Lanka as a whole has an interesting network of parks and sanctuaries, and about 25% of the country, which is a remarkable percentage for an Asian country in this day and age, is protected in one way or another. Either reserve forests and areas protected for its natural diversity, sanctuaries, reserves, and national parks. And it's one of the few countries that I know of that actually has a status of land holding above a national park. And these are strict nature reserves where no one, bar a few scientists at any one time, are allowed into it, so that they remain pristine. And this includes some interesting mountain hilltops with unique flora. And in the 25 or 30 years that I've been traveling in and out around Sri Lanka, I've only ever set foot in one of these areas once. They are quite literally off limits and protected for this wealth. But elephants are part of the Sri Lankan landscape almost wherever you go, and they're not restricted to national parks or sanctuaries. And we hopefully will, in the early days of this tour, will be able to get relatively close to wild elephants in a landscape where they travel. They migrate through a series of protected areas across the year. And they rotate, in a sense, between areas with water, with great grasslands, as you can see here, and into scrub forest, where they spend some of the winter months. And that's where we will find them. But you also occasionally find them sharing the road. Sorry, I've just got a hiccup and my slide is not moving. Not quite sure why that is.
Toby, take your cursor down to the bottom left of the slide and let's see if we can activate it. There we go.
It has moved. So it also jumped. So occasionally we find a wild elephant on our journey between points A and B and beyond. And the extraordinary thing is they seem to be remarkably disciplined and follow the traffic rules as pedestrians and walk along the side of the road. But occasionally we have to stop and let them cross. It's quite exciting when you're traveling around a corner and suddenly there's a wild elephant in front of you. It makes you realize that we share a planet with so many creatures and that whatever we do to our landscape, we have to give them space. Our base for the first few days in this landscape of archaeological sites and wilderness is the Cinnamon Lodge. It's a series of interesting lodges with extremely comfortable facilities. Nice large pool for those who have, if we ever have the time to use it, and good restaurants. Interestingly, within the compound, there's also a 10-acre organic farm which supplies much of the food for the hotel, but it's not just a farm, because within this area there are many, many wild animals, including a giant squirrel, and we can get fairly close and to these wonderful creatures as we walk through the compound. So even our hotels are part of the wilderness of Sri Lanka and share a space. There is also a very good wetland at the back of this property. These squirrels are in both Sri Lanka and in southern India, but in southern India they're restricted to less than 100 individuals. So Sri Lanka is the best place in the world to be able to get a chance to see them. We will also go out when we're staying here at night, in the early evening, for a walk to see slender lorises. These wonderful primitive, that sounds like a derogatory word, but it's not meant, primitive primates or proto-simians are rather like bush babies. And we will go out, we will use infrared lighting, and we won't just be these animals that we will see birds roosting. And it is, I remember the first time I went out and saw an a pitta, which is a bird of 7 colors, roosting, but under infrared it's really just a mottled single color tones, and it looked rather, I recognized the shape, but without the color I find it difficult to recognize the bird. So it's quite exciting and it's very cryptic to go out on these early evening walks. And we will go to, as I mentioned, to these archaeological sites. This is Sigiriya, an extraordinary rock fortress that was developed in the 4th century, and around it a series of royal gardens which were excavated about 30 years ago, and you can see this wonderful layout. Sigiriya, this rock face, is within a natural sanctuary. The landscape around it, the trees and the flora and fauna around this archaeological site are all protected as a nature reserve, but you can walk through it as a place of, after being a fortress, it became a monastery for close to 1,000 years, a place of retreat, and we can still do that and walk through it and walk up to the top of this amazing rock, and through the gardens with many endemic species. But it's, as I referred earlier, it's not just the flora, but also some very, very interesting archaeology that we will have a chance to explore and see in this wilderness. We move to another archaeological site called Polonnaruwa, which is where I spent 2.5 years helping and assisting a Disney project making a film called Monkey Kingdom, which was filmed entirely in the wild. And it is possible to work, and we walk out with a scientist, Wolfgang Dittus, who is in the center of this photograph, and his team of watchers who watch these, who've been studying Taka Macaques, a small endemic macaque or monkey. And Wolfgang has been studying these for more than 40 years. It is the longest continuous scientific study of any mammal species. It's an unbroken study. It is known as the Smithsonian Primate Study and was originally established as a Smithsonian project. Wolfgang was originally a Canadian, but now an American national. And his team will lead us and guide us through this remarkable site where we'll be able to get fairly close to there are three species of primates, of monkeys in the study, in the area, although the main study animal has been the macaque, the Taka macaque, an animal that takes its name from the small sort of bonnet-like hat on its head, which is similar to the hat the judges wore in Holland in the 17th century. And the word for that was a tok. These are langurs, or leaf monkeys, who share the same landscape and share these extraordinary ruins. And it is a very important Buddhist site for the people of Sri Lanka, a country where 70% of the population are practicing Buddhists. There is a group of school children in their Sunday best coming to pay homage to this extraordinarily beautiful sculpture carved out of a single piece of rock. Nearby is another hilltop with 30 caves, and we will go up and visit 5 of them, and within these caves, dating back 2,000 years, are a series of paintings, frescoes, dedicated to different aspects of the Buddha's life. This room that you're seeing here was reworked in the 17th and 18th centuries. And from there, we will then travel south through a town called Kandy, which is the cultural capital, or is considered as such by most Sri Lankans, where we will stop for lunch and visit a very important temple, and then carry on into the hill country, where we will stay at St. Andrew's Hotel, which in the 19th century was the Scots Club, a club established by Scottish tea planters in the area when they came down from their estates and needed some companionship. The small town of Neuralia, at about 5,000 feet, has some extremely good parks around it, municipal parks around it, and there is the endemic monkey, called a bear monkey or a langur. It's a purple-faced langur that we will go out to look for, and of course many species of birds, and there's some lovely walks to be had, and we'll go monkey primate watching. And early one morning we will go still higher to the Horton Plains, an extraordinary montane landscape above areas that can be successfully farmed or converted into tea plantations. These grasslands are home to samba deer, a large forest deer, a bit like an elk or a red deer. Patches of forest give cover to leopards. Eagles and birds of prey hover over these grasslands. And again, it is one of those parks, one of those lovely wilderness areas where we can walk looking for squirrels, looking for monkeys, and more endemic birds. It's a joy of being able to walk in a wilderness area makes traveling in Sri Lanka such a pleasure. Those of you who may have traveled elsewhere in Asia will realize that when you are in most parks, you are restricted and confined to a vehicle. And that in itself is fantastic because it gets you into areas that you wouldn't otherwise get. But to be able to also walk and set the pace, so to speak, is a rare privilege in Asia. From the hills, we then descend down to the plains. We'll stop at a place which has this fantastic view through a gap on the edge of the mountains. It's called Ella, or Ella Gap. We will stop for, take a break and on our journey and have some tea, coffee, or something to eat, and carry down into the plains, which ultimately flatten out and reach the coast of southeastern Sri Lanka. Here at Yala National Park, I made a film, or worked on a film for the BBC in 1999 to 2001 on leopards. And I fell in love with this place. It was, those days, fairly quiet, not often visited, but we were getting extraordinary leopard sightings. And by the coast, you also get to see elephants. As you can see, this small group of a mother and a calf and probably a sub-adult from an earlier generation. Wild buffalo wading through the wetlands. And to me, this is the most extraordinary cat. There's an enigma about leopards that I don't feel watching other cats. In Sri Lanka, the leopard is the apex predator. There are no tigers in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, after the last ice age, 9,500 years ago, Sri Lanka was separated from the Indian subcontinent, or from India, by the Palk Strait, a stretch of water. It's not very wide, but it's wide enough to isolate a population of leopards, a population of elephants, and both of which are local subspecies. Also separated Sri Lanka from the rest of India. In many other ways, the amphibian diversity of Sri Lanka is largely unknown, but is as great as Costa Rica's. There are 280 species of butterflies in Sri Lanka, many wonderful dragonflies and damselflies, all of which are part of the backdrop to our travels. And I referred to birds before. There are just under 500 species found in Sri Lanka. 240 odd are breed there. The others are migrants. And 35 species are now considered endemic, species that are not found anywhere else in the world. We will be based out of a camp. It's the only time we'll be under canvas on this tour. This is called Kulu Camp on a rather quiet edge of the national park, which gives us access into the middle of the park, away from the where a lot of the other tourist hotels are, but we still have access to the good game viewing areas. The camp is quite simple. It has attached bathrooms with hot and cold running water. It has fans and all mod cons. It also has excellent food, wonderful couple of cooks. We go out in these converted Toyota Land Cruisers, which are very comfortable. Each vehicle has a naturalist on board. There is no off-road driving in the other, so we stick to tracks, but it's a fairly extensive network, and hopefully we will see these extraordinary spotted cats, and the greatest of land mammals, the elephant. As I mentioned just now, the Sri Lankan elephant is now considered a separate race or subspecies of the Indian or Asian elephant. There are not very many tuskers in Sri Lanka. Historically, Sri Lanka's elephants were hunted for their ivory. It's something which is totally abhorrent to us today, but it's a historical fact, and we have to live with it and learn from it. Consequently, there are very few elephants have tusks. In Asia, only the males have tusks. But because of constant hunting for over 2,000 years, and there is evidence, for instance, of the Romans buying ivory from Sri Lanka 2,000 years ago, 1,800 years ago, the gene of ivory bearing or ivory wearing male elephants has sort of died back. So there are a lot of male elephants today born who do not develop tusks because the gene has been lost or has been diluted. I had to include some birds, and I thought these were the most colorful of birds, the painted storks, an extraordinary, a truly stunning animal, which we will find in Yala and hopefully a few other places in water bodies close to where we're driving. All these photographs, all the photographs you've seen, I have taken on trips to the parks or around the island without any special access, the same access as a traveler with natural habitat would enjoy. From Yala, if you remember from the map earlier, which I'm sorry I don't have a key one to show at this moment, we go from the southeast corner where Yala is along the south coast towards a town called Gore, of which I'll talk more in a moment. We stay in this rather lovely little villa. It's actually owned by a Norwegian, and it has 9 rooms, which we will take over. Although our groups are small, but we usually between 8 and 10 people. There is nothing south of what you can see here until you get to Antarctica. The whole of the southern Indian Ocean is a vast, vast expanse. And we will be staying in this extremely comfortable private villa. And from here, we will go out into the ocean. And half of Sri Lanka's extraordinary biodiversity is in the waters around the island. There is a resident population of blue whales, the largest mammal ever known to be on this planet, to share this planet with elephants, the largest of land mammals, and marauding human beings. But it's not only blue whales that we see as close to the coastline as 2 miles, sometimes even closer. It is possible to stand on the coast and see whales from the pool, the villa that we'll be staying at. But we will go out in boats. There are different times of year. You get sperm whales, pods of sperm whales in March and April. Bright whale, occasionally orcas, although I must stress they are unpredictable, and various dolphin species. And there is one area off the coast of Sri Lanka that gets up to 10,000 spinner dolphins. So the seas are incredibly rich. And they're rich because of the runoff from the land, the runoff, the rivers, which are monsoon fed, bring nutrients down off the land into the oceans around the island, and those nutrients feed plankton and other marine creatures, which in turn are the food sources for these huge, magnificent mammals, these marine mammals. And it's in a very exciting sort of natural history end to our conclusion to one part of this program. But we do use this villa on the south coast as an opportunity to visit the nearby town of Gaul. As you can see from this aerial photograph I took a few years back, it is an isthmus. It's sticking out into the southeast corner of Sri Lanka, and it sums up the great diversity of the country. This port was visited 2,000 years ago and more by sort of pre-Islamic Arab traders that used to come across from the Red Sea, across the Indian Ocean to India and to Sri Lanka to trade. The Chinese came to this area in the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries. The Portuguese arrived in the late 15th century, in the 1490s. 1496 was when Vasco da Gama first arrived on the southwest coast of India, and they were in Sri Lanka a few years later. And then the Dutch. And what you see in this town is really a Dutch town. It's the fortress. It's one of the finest and best preserved European forts in Asia. What we see today was what the Dutch developed in the late 17th and 18th centuries. And then the British took over the governing of the coastal areas around Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was then, in the 1780s, and but they didn't really touch Gaul. They moved the capital to Colombo, which is where it is today, and Gaul remained or retains a lot of its sort of higgledy-piggledy Dutch village atmosphere. And we will walk through it. Lots of lovely houses, now delightful boutiques, bistros, shops. It's been partly gentrified. We can walk along the coast. There's the lighthouse. And it's like so much of Sri Lanka, it is a sort of microcosm of society with Buddhist temples, Catholic churches, Protestant churches, a synagogue, a mosque, everything living side by side in this wonderful, wonderful country. Finally, we return to Colombo, where it all started, where you flew in 12 days earlier. And we will stay. This is the old Colombo Club from the 1880s. As you can see, it's a rather sort of Victorian, colonial Victorian. It has now been incorporated into the Taj Hotel along the coast of Sri Lanka, of Colombo, looking out at the Arabian Sea, looking west. And this is our base for the last 36 hours of the tour, which can, of course, be extended. We will spend some time in Colombo looking at what's on offer, how the capital of this sort of vibrant country, a country that's went through a very dark patch but came out of it 6 years ago and is today confident and doing extremely well for itself. It's a country of great contrast. It's a country of great beauty. And I look forward to welcoming you there. When you come back, come and join me with Natural Habitat. Thank you very much.
Toby, thank you so much for your informative presentation. We have several questions that have been submitted by our audience members, so I'm going to just jump right into those. Oh, the weather. This is always a popular question. How's the weather in February?
We've chosen to run these programs from the end of end of January through to April with the weather in mind, that the places that we will be visiting will be warm but not hot, and we shouldn't be getting too much rain. In this age of undeniable climate change, and things can be unpredictable. But normally, the south, central, and western parts of Sri Lanka are dry in February, as they would from mid-January, really, through to April, and then we start getting rain. But it doesn't mean there can't be any rain at all, because it is a tropical island, and the weather is a fickle goddess.
So keeping this in mind, we had a question, excuse me just a minute, we had a question about, sorry about that, we had a question about what types of shoes and clothes you would recommend.
We will do some walking, as you saw in the images. So a pair of trainers, light trainers would be good. I wear these sort of keens, which are sort of what I call, which are slightly more sophisticated versions of what Tevas that we used to wear 10 years ago, because they've got a little bit of more protection. I think male or female, long sleeve shirts or blouses, long trousers are good to wear, because there are insects sometimes. Sri Lanka is not a malaria country. It is malaria free, but there are mosquitoes, and mosquitoes bite whether they're carrying malaria or not. And so some protection is good. We always use bug spray, recommend bug spray for those of you who can wear it. But I believe long sleeve shirts or blouses and long trousers are a more comfortable way to travel, or long skirts if that's what you would prefer to wear. Also hats during the daytime. We're only 8 degrees north of the equator. The sun, although it's not that hot in January, February, the sun can be quite strong. And when we go into the hill country, again, as you saw from some of those photographs, people were wearing jackets, lightweight jackets or fleeces, and I would always recommend that you have one in your bag.
All right, great, thank you. And another practical question here: how many travelers will be in each of the vehicles?
The maximum number of people in the vehicles going into the parks, well, the number of seats is 6. So if we have a group of 10 people, I would use 2 vehicles. So there would be, and the extra seat would have a naturalist in each vehicle. If there were only 7 or 8 of us in a group, we would still use 2 vehicles, but there would be more space. But if we ever ran a trip with more than 10 people, which is not something we've designed, but if we ever did, we would have to use a 3rd vehicle. So really a maximum of 5 guests in any one vehicle at any one time, and the vehicles are 6-seaters.
Perfect, thank you. We were talking about taking time to read before we started this broadcast, and there's this great question came in. It says, what literature do you recommend to get acquainted with the endemic species and fauna in Sri Lanka?
A very good question. There is a couple of locally published books. I'm not sure they're available in the US. That's the only problem. They may be available on Amazon, but whether they're available from Longitude Books, I'm not sure. There's one called Wild Sri Lanka, which is the same title as the series, the television series I referred to. And actually, that television series is not a bad introduction. It was made for National Geographic and is, I believe, viewable on YouTube. There was a series of 3 programs. The first one looked at the coasts and the seas. So there was a fair amount of under the surface as well, diving information, but whales, dolphins, turtles along the coastal areas, which is another species that we may be lucky to see in a couple of places. 5 of the world's interocean turtles nest and occasionally breed on Sri Lanka's coasts. So the first program dealt with the coasts and the oceans. The second program dealt with the grasslands and the plains, the sort of landscape where you would find elephants and leopards. And the third program dealt with the hill country, with a lot of endemism, a lot of amphibians, birds, and the primates. So there's a huge variety in a relatively small country.
Yes, okay.
I actually answered your question as to which is the best book, because I know the book. I'm 99% certain that book is not available in the US. But there are books, and it will be included, I guess, in the information packs that we will prepare for these trips.
Perfect, thank you. And I think I'll make this my last question. It's about cultural interaction. Besides being primarily Buddhist, what are the other characteristics of the natives, and will we interface with them?
Yes, you certainly will. I mean, I don't think we can ever travel, or I would never travel, or take people through a country where we wouldn't travel in a bubble. We would travel in a way that we would be able to meet and interact and see and talk to people at different levels. We don't have to be over ambitious about it, but at our comfort levels, we would certainly have interaction. We talked about Buddhism. 70% of the country is Buddhist, and Buddhism, in a sense, dictates the calendar. I mean, for instance, every full moon is a holiday, is a public holiday. Because the full moon is associated with Lord Buddha at the time of his birth, the time of his enlightenment, and the moment that he achieved nirvana, and other stages of his life. There is a very old Christian society in Sri Lanka. As you probably know, I mean, Christianity reached southern India with Thomas, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus, in AD 50. It's a very, very old Christian community. It actually predates Christianity in Europe, in the West, by many centuries. Islam came to South Asia with traders across the ocean. It did not come with sort of soft Islam. It's the same Islam that went to Indonesia and Malaysia and southern India, and is again part of society. So there's quite an interesting mix. And Hinduism came down into northern Sri Lanka well over 2,000 years ago, and it's the same route that Buddhism traveled into the country. Sri Lanka is actually the oldest continuous Buddhist society in the world. But yes, we'll have interaction. We will see witness these as we travel. We will meet people, unless they happen to be wearing saffron robes or a dog collar around their neck. You wouldn't know which religion they practiced or came from. It's a pretty tolerant society, and it's something we all support.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Toby. I will stop now with the question and answer and give you an opportunity for closing comments before we say goodbye.
Well, thank you. Well, it's always a joy to share images and ideas and stories about a place that one loves and a place that one respects. Joy that I get out of traveling in Sri Lanka, as I do in India, which is a country I've been based in for 40 years, is that I'm still learning. Every day I learn something new. And it is the ability to share those experiences and share the excitement of learning that I think these trips make these trips fun. And I hope you will be able to join me on one of the trips sometime in the next couple of years.
Well, thank you so much, and everyone, if you do have some interest in this wonderful trip that we've discussed today, please do give us a call or call your travel professional, and we will get the replay out to all of you by about this time tomorrow, so do be on the lookout for that. We will send you an email with the link to the replay. So with that, we will say good day and conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everyone, and Toby, thank you again.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Bye.